Hello, my name is Sang Ho. Welcome to the third webinar of the MineMarket webinar series. Today, we are going to look at the topic of tracking contributors in MineMarket. According to our statistics, less than half of our MineMarket user base is using the contributors function. This has prompted us to ask the question, why? Contributors is the built-in functionality in MineMarket. You only need to do some very basic configuration and you can reap the benefits that it delivers. That is one of the reasons why we created this webinar. We hope that through this session, you will find the use of this powerful functionality. The agenda for today. We're going to cover the following topics. The concept of contributors. As its name implies, it is designed to track the contribution factors or contributing ratios of the source entities into a target stockpile. So what is there to explain? The goal here is to dig a bit deeper to understand what we meant by source entity and to explain the processing behind the scene, which is called downstream processing. Downstream processing is the engine, if you like, the smart of the MineMarket solution. It differentiates MineMarket to the rest of supply chain management, inventory management solutions. With downstream processing, a change to any of the upstream sources will cause the downstream stockpiles to be adjusted or updated automatically. This update or adjustment involve not only tons or volume, but grades and of course the contributing ratios if we are using the contributors function. Next is the concept of contributor analytes. This refers to the fact that the weighting factors are not limited to just tons and volume, but can be based on the quality of the contributing sources. And the rest of the agenda is to do with a practical session of how to start configuring the contributors so that we can use in our examples. And lastly, contributors applications. We'll discuss a few examples of how our MineMarket clients use the contributors function in the operations. Okay, during the session, I'll be using a coal mining company as an example for our exercises. Here we have the process flow of a generic mining operation. As you can see, as a supply chain management system, MineMarket tracks the movement of your material from the ores that you extract, the waste that you remove from either underground or open pit, to the raw stockpiles, through the processing plant, to the sellable finished product. Then onward, via the logistics function, it tracks the transportation of the products to the port, onto the shipment, and all the way to the end customers. Along the supply chain, MineMarket collects and stores the movement data, which we call transactions. So these transactions, combined with the downstream processing capabilities, will become the building block, the smart, the engine of MineMarket. Okay, Let's look at the concept of contributor. Here is a picture of a river system in which waters will flow from various sources and combine at various points in the system, all the way downstream to the lowest point. That could be a pond, or in this case, an ocean. Yeah. As you can see in this system, any changes in terms of volume of water flow, of the quality, would in fact impact the quantity and the quality downstream. A very simple illustration of the concept of contributors. Note the last bullet point, the need for measurement. Yeah, without it, then the whole concept of contributors would fail. Let's apply this to mining. If you could think of the different color bands as, say, coal seams in our example here, then you can use the contributors function to track the contributing ratio of the various seams onto the target downstream stockpile. In this case, is our ROM, or could be further down the track, our product stockpiles, our train, our ship. Similarly, if we have different mining lists, for example, which is represented here by the rectangles, or we could equate those to, let's say, pit. We have 3 pits here, pit 1, 2, and 3. Then you can use the contributors function to track the contributing ratios of our mining lists, our pits. The entities that we're tracking, in other words, our seam, our pit, mining lists, or even ownership, are the contributing entities that we were talking about earlier on. To appreciate the power of the contributors function, let's look at the building block that enables the calculation of contributors, the transaction. Look at the screen capture on the left, which is the activity screen of MineMarket for a particular stockpile, in this case, the product stockpile number 1. It lists all the transaction into and out of prod 01. Okay, so each line represents a transaction which incorporates the date and time of the movement, the process flow name, which defines the source and destination stockpiles, the type of the materials being moved, the tons, and the grades, etc. Look how similar it is to the screen capture on the right-hand side here, which represent a bank statement for a particular account. Here you have the date and the time, the nature of the transaction, the deposit, the withdrawal, very similar concept, and a very sound model. Once the transaction's been entered into the system, then what does the downstream processing do? MineMarket will automatically update the current state of the stockpile in terms of tons and grades, and also a whole host of other attributes such as contributors ratio. And from there you can see the traceability, the genealogy through a diagram view. So once a transaction has been processed, you get instantaneously the update of the stockpile. And you can see now the contributing factors or contributing ratio by seam, by pitch, by ownership, or any other contributing entity that you define. And then from there, MineMarket will show you the genealogy of all the flow from source to your target stockpile. All right, we'll leave it at that, and I will switch to the MineMarket application now, so we can show you how to configure and use the contributors function. All right, so those are the few steps to remind us how to set up contributors. Here we have the mining pit. From there, we move material to either ROM or waste. Sometimes we move directly to the crusher. And then from there, we do primary crushing. And then we feed the coal into our CHPP plant. And then out come products in the product stockpiles. Either we can sell it directly to the consumers at that point in time, or we can further route it to the port. And then we load the ship. All right, so along the supply chain, we can look at any location, either ROM or product stockpiles or at the port, to look at the effect of what downstream processing is doing. So I open up my business area tree. Under diversified mining, I have mining area. In my mine pit, I have 4 pits, east, north, south, and west. Under each of these pits, I have a number of active coal faces. So, for example, here, this mine source, if I double click to open that, the current state is what we have in the mine source itself right now. Yeah. If I show you something further downstream, like in my ROM stockpile, under the ROM area, I have 2 stockpiles, ROM 1 and ROM 2. Open up one ROM. So at any one time, I see the current state of my stockpile. So I have now the closing balance, I have now the current grade or quality. And if I go to my activities now, there is the activity screen. Okay, from this date to this date window, I have a list of activities, as we showed before. Each of these lines here represent a transaction that incorporate the time, process flow, source, destination, and my quantity I moved for that transaction. If I click on this Show Analyte, okay, behind the scene, the analysis, the grade of that movement of that package of 4,342 tons is moved along. And then using that, the downstream processing engine will update the balance in terms of tons and grades. Now, behind the scene, MineMarket also updates the contributors. Here I have set up 3 contributing entity, or 4 in this case: mining list, ownership, pits, and SIM. All right, if I click on SIM, so what is shown here is the contributing ratio from the various SIM I have defined. So I have 3 SIMs: Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. So MineMarket calculate, at this point in time, 36.48%, which is the Alpha SIM, and that many percent come from Charlie, and the blue one, 33%, comes from Bravo. All right. Now, so how does it calculate the percentage? It uses the total tons from each of these contributing entity, which is called, in this case, SIM, and it uses a straightforward calculation. But if you see further to the right here, CV. Now, in terms of CV, which is calorific value of the coal that is contributed to this stockpile, okay, it slightly higher value. In terms of tons, alpha only contributing 36.48% to RAM1 at this point in time. However, in terms of CV, the calorific value, it contributed 36.64, which is slightly higher. How come? It could be because the coal that we dug out of alpha is of higher CV value than the rest. Therefore, the calculation is slightly different. And that is what we referred to earlier on as the contributor analyte. All right. So with this simple illustration, we have explained to you the difference between two types of contributing factors. One is just straight volume based, ton based. The other one is quality based. Let's have a look something further downstream. If we look at our product stockpile, open up product number 1. Similarly, we have traceability, which, as you can see, it's quite a complex genealogy all the way from the source. And similarly, we have also contributors here. We have here from ownership, and similarly, I can do, have a look at the contributors from my pit. Each of this pit is contributing to my product stockpile number 1 in this ratio. But that is volume wise. But CV wise is slightly different. Okay. Let's have a look at how we put it all into practice. First of all, we need to add a contributor group. This is what we call the contributor entity. All right. So I'm going to my quality menu. From there, I have an option called contributor group. Okay. If I have a look at ownership, which is an entity in which I have 2 members, diversified mining and joint venture. Pit, I have 4 members. Theme, I have here Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. I started playing with mining lists, but I haven't done it. I have created a new entity called mining list, which has 2 members. Mining list 2018, mining list 2019, etc. So how do I do that? I just right click and a new mining group, meaning contributor group, meaning the entity we're talking about. I can put in here. Okay, for example, test contributors, and then within each of these here, I can right click new contributors. All right. So that is my contributor 1, contributor 2, etc. So this process is pretty simple. You need to define your contributor group. Okay, what entity, what are you trying to track? Okay, once you've done that, then you need to go to your source. Now, I'm not saying here mine source, just source. Now, you need to assign the contributors to the source. The source here can be a mine source or a stockpile. Why so? Because not everyone want to start tracking the contribution from the mine source. Some operations do not track the process flow from mine to the product stockpile. They simply start the process, okay, from the plant itself, from here, downstream. So in this case, you might have to start the process with the product stockpile, right? So that's why by assigning contributors Okay, you may not have to go back all the way to the mine sources, but in our case, we want to do that. Let me just close all the windows. I will do a refresh. Let me, for example, start adding a new sim, all right, which is a member of my entity called sim. I say I have now a sim called Delta, which is a new sim I just discovered or I just start working on. Now, how do I assign that to my mine sources? I go to my mine source, which I have under my pit here, east, north, south, and west. I just pick one. Okay, I just picked the east pit, which is the new one, and I open up my mine source called E12010A. I go to my Assign Contributors tab. All right, let me put the date back a bit. Let's say starting last month, I started using this sim. And it's not alpha, it was delta. So in other words, I'm defining or assigning this sim delta to my mine source. And while I'm there, I define the ownership of that. So this was owned by 100% by DMV, or could be 50-50. So as long as this is added or add up to 100% for each of the entity, that's fine. And this pit is east. That's how MineMarket know this come from east pit, north pit, etc. And as far as mining list go, well, this is belong to mining list 2018. Once we've done that, we save away, then that become our starting point. All right. So if I go back to my ROM one now, if I look at the contributors for sim, you will not see delta. Of course not, because we have only created these mine sources moments ago. All right. So I'm going to do some changes to my upstream. So I need to go and either enter a new transaction or make some changes to an old transaction. So let me do the latter. So I go to my transaction editors, open up my coal mining transaction editor, which allows me to enter new transactions or view any existing transactions. All right. So if I look at for example, the transaction that took place on the 31st of May, a few days ago, let me double click, open it up. Let's say, well, I make a mistake when I enter this data. It didn't come from north, but it indeed come from east. So I could do that, change that to east pit, and then our new stockpile here. Yeah. So let's say I make another mistake here. It wasn't ROM 2, but ROM 1. All right. Before I save it, let's go back to our sim and have a look at this data here. In fact, let me just capture this so that we don't have any doubt. So right now, this is the current status of my contributors for my sim for ROM 1. Yeah. So I go back to my transaction and then I do a save. So what did I do? I make some changes to my transaction in the past. All right. So remember, we described the downstream processing capability. Now, MineMarket is going through that right now. So it's going through downstream processing. And now, if I look at ROM 1 again, you see the difference. Yeah. So if I go to my ROM 1, open it up, contributors, compared to before. So the fact that Delta has now crept into here represent 14%, 14.5%, and it reduced the percentage of contribution from Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. My CV though has not managed to get in because I haven't yet given my source stockpile any quality here. That is empty compared to the rest of my mine sources, which has quality. All right. So what have we seen so far? We have demonstrated how you can set up the contributors using contributor group. We have demonstrated how you can assign the initial contributors to the mine source through Assign Contributors tab. Let's have a look at the ownership split here for my ROM 1. ROM 1 ownership. It's not obvious, but that 50-50 from my each mine source would have been contributed to a slight different ratio here. And we also have demonstrated the downstream processing function, which resulted in a change in my downstream target stockpile. With that, I would like to move on to the last slide, which is how other mining company that uses MineMarket, okay, use the contributors function. Some company are using the contributors function to split the revenue. So once a shipment is loaded, invoice can be generated from MineMarket, and then the invoice can be split, okay, based on MineMarket contributors function. Another application is to provide the clarity, the insight to a delivery shipment. Once a shipment is loaded and delivered, you may receive complaints or queries from the customers about certain aspect of the coal shipment. Okay, it doesn't burn easily, for example. Then you can using the traceability and contributors function to respond to that complaint. Historically, when a coal shipment involve certain mine sources, then you tend to have this problem. And some other company using the contributors function to maximize the value of a delivery through blending. Knowing what comes from where, it gives you a better option to choose to blend, okay, so that you can maximize revenue. By the way, the webinar next week, we'll be talking about the blending function within MineMarket. So I hope you can join us then.